family. His name is Zevi Kaufman, who runs Rav Breitowotz's podcast, and he had a plug for those who saw it through the podcast about Rav Breitowotz's unbelievable hekif. You know, the Gemara talks about Isha Eshkolos, Isha Kol Boi. The Gemara says actually that's really not existent on that level, but Baruch Hashem and Ardor was able to have someone that literally is the Rav of the Kilas Sameach, and we're actually very fortunate to have him part of our inaugural Yarchei Kallah. And I hope you're prepared, because any question on any topic that you were ever curious about, or even maybe didn't even think of, you'll hear from others and it'll generate some thoughts. Please feel free. I'll be a little bit of a moderator just to call whoever raising their hands. But we'd like to take this opportunity to really delve into the chachma that's here and hopefully resolve some of the outstanding questions. You can leave feeling a little more settled. So who would like to be the nachshon?
Well, I just want to say just a little word of introduction. First of all, we're very, very grateful that you've come. You know, Or Sameach is known, of course, as the place for the Baal Tshuva. But somebody once went to get a Rebbe. He introduced himself as a Talmud of Or Sameach, but he hastened to add, but I'm not a Baal Tshuva. And the Ger Rebbe said, not a Baal Tshuva? Why not? Every year is supposed to be a Baal Tshuva. So the emes is, a Baal Tshuva is somebody who wants to grow. A Baal Tshuva who understands that life is about trying to reach higher and higher and become better and better and closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a lifetime process. So the emes is, I want to welcome you to the Fellowship of Baalei Tshuva. The fact that you've come to the Yarchei Kallah means you want to grow in your learning, and I know that when you're back in your homes, you're doing the same. So a tremendous Yarchei Kallah. And again, we're very excited. I certainly did not expect this type of turnout on such short notice. It's really a tribute to Reb Shlomi Schiller, who is such an indefatigable organizer. And I hope, Bezras Hashem, we should continue to do this relatively often. So feel free to ask, and I will feel free to decline to answer if I feel there are reasons not to answer. Yeah.
Okay, this is kind of a subset of the Shiva guys serving in the IDF. The question
Okay.
I think we're going to next.
Yeah.
This is more focused on that.
Yeah.
How do we view the stated mission of the IDF? They used to call it creating the new Jew. Now they just call it socialization, but it's there. So it's not solely a defense mechanism, not solely a defense organization. There's also another mission there.
Yeah, now this is precisely what the problem is, meaning if we were to simply analyze this as Jewish people under threat, Jewish people as an enemy that wants to destroy us, we have to fight back, then we could apply the normal rhetoric of Milchemes Mitzvah, and Milchemes Mitzvah, I mean, there's a debate, but at least it's debatable. Is there an exemption for a person learning Torah? Some say yes, some say no. And once you deal with the Makairis themselves, there's a very strong case that even B'nai Torah are draftable, although there's also a case not. Problem is that we're not simply dealing with the realm of defense against an external enemy. We're dealing with a certain agenda that involves homogenization, socialization. That absolutely was Ben-Gurion's very, very strong vision going back to 1948, in which he wants to create a new Israeli Jew. He looked at mitzvos as kind of the Golos, the old European model. Let's create a new Jew who focuses on strength and heroism, and by putting everybody through a common experience, we're going to have that homogenization. Now, that's a very different thing. That's no longer dealing with defense of the enemy. That's dealing with trying to change people. So many Gedolei Yisrael feel that is directly a sakana. Now, I'm going to put myself out a little bit. I don't want to do it too much because of hate mail and all that other stuff. One can debate this, meaning to say Ben-Gurion's thing back in 1948 is lav dafka what's going on now. Now there are Haredi units. Now there are attempts of accommodation. But on the other hand, too little. A lot of things are not working properly. We have actual evidence of a lot of kids from Haredi or from backgrounds who went off the derech. On the other hand, we also have kids who remain strong and remain stark and maybe even got better. So Empirically, this is a bit of a confusion. It's a bit of a fog. I think you did identify the issue, meaning if the issue would be defense, I think there would be much, much less opposition to at least participating in some type of national service. If the issue is assimilation and obliteration of a Torah way of life, that is a very, very, very serious problem. Whether indeed that is what is going on in the army, I think is a little uncertain. And that's why, unfortunately, demonization and sloganeering and name-calling on either side is not going to advance the ball, meaning a Haredi looks at the other side and says, Amalek and Rishayim, and you want to be Mashlis Torah, and the other side looks at B'nai Torah and says parasites and, leeches and everything else. Nothing is going to get resolved in that way. We have a real problem. Israel has defense needs, and we're miming that we need hishtadlus, we need a strong army. We're miming in that. We believe that's part of the plan. But even more importantly, we need Torah learning, we need avodas Hashem, we need mitzvahs. This is not only a religious issue, this is a security issue. A Maimon believes that if chas v'shalom, the Torah learning is going to be minimized in Eretz Yisrael, we are in physical danger. I have to emphasize that. This is not simply a spiritual idea of avodas Hashem, which actually that's more important really, but it's not only that. It is a matter of security. So how do you balance this? This is the proverbial irresistible force against an immovable object. We have to strengthen the army, and those are totally legitimate. We have to strengthen Torah learning. We have to figure out a way to try to accomplish both. In some circles, Hester was considered to be a proper accommodation. There are Kam of Gedalim in the Haredi world who feel that Hester is not enough. It's too diluted in different ways. Again, I don't want to castigate. I don't want to negate anybody. All I'm saying is this is a real problem. This is not a problem of light versus dark. This is not a problem of good versus evil. This is a question of recognizing legitimate needs in the Torah world, in the Jewish world, and trying to balance and accommodate. And you are right. The primary concern I think our Gedolim have is not about not defending Klal Yisrael. I mean, Rav Chaim Kanevsky had a gun for at least a few days in 1948. He didn't have a problem trying to defend Jewish lives. The problem is the assimilationist, homogenization aspect of the army, which might be very, very serious. Yeah.
What's the reason and source for that we say Mizmor David 3 times during Shalosh Shudas?
Yeah, Mizmor LeDavid. Okay, so Shalosh Shudas, Sudah Shlishit, Mizmor LeDavid 3 times. So some say, and you sometimes find this, that this was kind of a mistake. You were supposed to say Mizmor LeDavid at each Sudah, but kind of, you didn't get around to it, so you did it 3 times, Sudah Shlishit. But some add to it a nice little twist. Why do we call in Yiddish, we call Sudah Shlishis Shalosh Sudas. Now Shalosh Sudas literally means 3 meals, not the 3rd meal. So they say that the first 2 meals, when you eat them, you're hungry. So you're not necessarily eating L'Shem Shemayim. Come, Sudah Shlishis, where even though you're not that hungry, particularly in the winter, and you still eat, that's Megala, that all of your Achila on Shabbos was L'Shem Shemayim. So Sudah Shlishis elevates, is misakein, all of the other 2 meals. So Memele, it could be that the Mizmor LeDavid, which is going on all of the meals, you put in the Sudah Shlishis, which is the Sudah of L'Shem, totally L'Shem Shemayim.
What's the reason for saying it B'chlal in the Sudah?
Oh, why do you say it B'chlal?
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes from the Arizal. The Arizal writes that since Shabbos is the Makor HaBracha, Shabbos is the source of the bracha of the whole week, the Shefa Parnasa of the whole week. So David HaMelech says, Tarech lefanai shulchan. Give me my shulchan. My shulchan is my parnasa, my sustenance. Shabbos is the Makor HaBracha. It's a very important idea because, as you know, the history of American Judaism was that many people stopped keeping Shabbos, even though they were Orthodox, actually, because of parnasa. In fact, I used to say this, one of the things at least some rabbis didn't like, they don't like the early Shabbos minyan in a show because it's a way of not hearing the drasha, whatever it would be. So I used to like to remind my show, the origin, all of you chashuva b'nei Torah, go to the early minyan. The origin of the early Shabbos minyan were people who went to work after shul. They had to open the store. They had to open the store by 9. It's B'dafka was the minion of Mechalelei Shabbos. So Memela, it could be that B'dafka on Shabbos, we want to talk about Shabbos, is the makor of Parnasa. It doesn't take away your Parnasa in that way. Yeah.
Jacob?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you'll pick the people.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So, a while back, I was referencing for a shidduch where it was going really well. It was like they were on the 8th date. I get a call from the girl, and she says that she found out that the boy doesn't believe the Zohar was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So I said, okay.
Yeah.
I said, okay. I hear. It doesn't know. Not sure how it's relevant. It was in yeshiva. It was learning. It was. So I said, it's like not one of the Yud Gil Ikra Muna. That's what I said. And then I got a call from her Rav, and her Rav said that the Chazon Ish said that someone doesn't believe that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar is a Apikoros, and I don't know. I'm not familiar, but to this day it's like bothering me. Like he was a good fellow. He was like, where did we get all these extra purity tests on top of the
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say that there actually is a shita that's well documented, that if you believe in Kabbalah, you're an apikoros. I mean, meaning there is, even though that's very not the mainstream shita, but the idea of spheres and pirud and division within God, So again, it's not so pashut. Oily if you believe, oily if you don't believe. So we have enough labels of apikoros. Now we can label anybody an apikoros for like anything they believe in this area. I mean, the issue of the Zohar and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, okay, I agree 100% with you. It's not mi'ikri Emunah, but it was a belief that the Arizal had, that the Gra had, the Ramchal had. So Memela, the way I tell people is this: if you don't believe it, you're not an apikoros, but you might be a fool. But I would also add that even if you say the Zohar is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, that doesn't mean he wrote every word. It's a davar pashut ba'id, that there are things in the Zohar that were added later. Less mandapolig. I mean, there are Moraim that are referred to who lived hundreds of years after Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. So the same way that when Chazal tell us David HaMelech wrote Tehillim, it says Beferish in the Gemara itself, but there were Asara Zakanim. Different people contributed. He's the main author. So the Zohar is the same thing. So it does not mean every word is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay. Now, your general question, where do we add all of these tests? Yeah, I mean, listen, here in Eretz Yisrael, if you have a job in some circles, your daughter will have difficulty getting a shidduch. I mean, talk about a test there, What type of test is that? Or in some seminary applications, they ask, you wouldn't even know where this question is coming from. Does your mother serve chicken soup or vegetable soup Friday night? I think you have to think a little bit, like what exactly, like the Ma'inaf Kamina, but apparently some things turn upon those types of questions. Vegetable soup, kal, too much of a kal, whatever it is, New Age spirituality. So part of it, frankly, is fear, meaning to say, as the world gets less and less moral, as the world gets less and less coherent in terms of midos, in terms of tznius, so we kind of we have a little bit of a circle the wagons mentality, which I understand that psychologically. We got to be starker. We got to be more rejecting. We have to be more insular. We have to be more separated, because the world is losing the basic decency that at one time general society had. If you go back to public schools, there are kama older Rosh Hashivas here who actually went to public school because they were growing up at a time in America before World War II where there weren't that many day schools. They went to public school, which means they recited the Lord. I don't know if they recited, but they were in a school in those days before the Supreme Court authored it. They were reciting Christian prayers and Christmas carols. There wasn't any of this separation of church and state, but they survived it, because the truth of the matter is, I'm using America as an example. In American civic culture, there was a basic decency. There was a basic menschlichkeit. There was a basic midos. You could send your kid to public school. I mean, it was never optimal, but, it was a decent environment. So Memela, we were able to live with all sorts of things. I believe that in the 1950s, they had a survey of what were the major problems in a public school classroom. So it was spitballs and talking out loud. They did the survey by the 1990s. It was, guns and knives and cocaine, same age group. So in a sense, you understand. Zeh liyu maseh. It's getting out so bad there that we got to be stronger and starker here, because if you let anything in from out there, who knows what's going to happen. Again, I'm not even saying I agree with that attitude per se, but I think that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a real pachad that if we try to be too open to leniencies or different hashkafas, things can go. I mean, I'll give you an example. Maybe I shouldn't say this either. When I was a Rav, so I was a Rav in a modern Orthodox place, although maybe you'll call it right, right of center. But still, I would say mainly modern. So I was approached mainly by the mothers of girls. They wanted to do a women's davening thing for Kabbalah Shabbos. Kabbalah Shabbos, meaning no minyan. They wouldn't say Devarim Shebekdusha, and it would only be girls. And the girl would lead Kabbalah Shabbos. So in my naivete, I said, well, Kabbalah Shabbos for women only. What's the problem? What is Kabbalah Shabbos? It's 6 kapitlach of Tehillim, and then you sing L'cha Dodi, and then you say another kapitel, Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbos. Not Ma'ariv, not Kaddish, not anything. So I said, yeah, sure, as long as, no men are there. Why not? So the truth is, I got a lot of flack for it. People say, oh, you're staring shidduchim and they're going to hear in Lakewood this and that. Because what's the fear? The fear is the old slippery slope argument, which is it's always an argument in ethical analysis. And that is, okay, this week you have Kabbalah Shabbos, next week you have women aliyahs, and then the week after you're going to have a woman rabbi, and that's what's going to happen, and therefore, you can't have a women's Kabbalah Shabbos. Do I agree with that, hashkafa? Not necessarily, but do I understand it? Yes, I do. So a lot of what you're experiencing comes from that notion of you open the door a little bit, who knows what you're going to get. And Mimela, that's why I think we're a little more strict and insular and closed-minded, maybe, than we need to be, but it's kind of a gezerah, a siyag, not to be too open to things that can really destroy you in that way.
With Anthony?
The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim, Sivu Chachamim, that we should do certain types of chesed with non-Jews, because of Darchei Shalom and Hashem is Rachamav al Kol Ma'asav, and we should follow that way. The Shulchan Aruch says, Mutar lefarnes aniyeihem. It's mutar to do it. And it suggests this is a different mahalach, maybe a different approach to Darchei Shalom. When you're in a pinch, when you're maybe Mishum Eva, you do it, but it's not something you should look to do because we're Rachav and because it's Darchei Shalom is this vision of these. So I find myself more drawn to the Rambam, and my question is, firstly, does the Rav agree that maybe the Shulchan Aruch is going in a different direction? But I have a sort of meta question, which is, if I want to know Hilchos Borer, so I want to know the halacha, I'm going to look more towards the Shulchan Aruch than to the Rambam. So in something like this, when looking at a hashkafa, how we relate to the outside world, broader ethical ideas, is it legitimate to say I find myself more drawn towards the Rambam than to the Shulchan Aruch, even though ordinarily halacha l'maisa, I wouldn't do such a thing?
Yeah, I mean, both of these points are very interesting points. As you correctly point out, the Mishnah in Gittin is the Makor that says we're mefarnasin aniyei oved kochavim aniyei Yisrael because of Darchei Shalom, but there seems to be a machlokas Rishonim. What is Darchei Shalom? Some Rishonim learn it's the same thing as Eva, meaning be nice to the goyim, otherwise they're going to kill you, and therefore it's not that there's inherently an ethical maila in being good to them, but I do it as a matter of self-preservation and national self-preservation and the like, and we'll call this maybe a particularistic ethic, the ethic of particularity in which essentially my obligations of chesed are to Jews, but I got to deal with the non-Jewish world in order not to create antagonism and the like. There is such a shita that collapses, that conflates Darchei Shalom and Eva as a single idea, but you are also correct that the Rambam notably disassociates the idea, and the Rambam considers there to be an inherent ethical value in the kindness and the hatava that we give towards even the Umot HaOlam, even over the Avodah Zarah, not just a Maimin. So it's not totally under Meiri, and the like, even a Mamish and idolater. And that is because of the notion of Barachamav al Kol Masav. This is how we emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the way it's expressed is that the first view views ethics from the particularistic lens of the Jewish people. The other views ethics as a universalistic imperative. And it could be, although I didn't see that in the Shulchan Aruch's difference in wording, but it could very well be that perhaps Rav Yosef Karo is alluding to that. Although I would say it's a little unusual that he would depart from the Lashon of the Rambam. That's bichlal an interesting question, because he normally does follow the Rambam. But that's the Beis Yosef's famous 2 out of 3 rule, which almost always means the Rambam wins. If it's Rif, Rambam, Rush, and Rif and Rambam are always the same. So Shulchan Aruch is essentially a restatement of the Rambam. Now, your second question, though, regarding ethical, philosophical directions and orientations, even though we don't necessarily look to the Rambam as the final source of halacha, we look to the Shulchan Aruch and the Nosei Kelim, but would things be different in the realm of hashkafa? I believe so, because the Shulchan Aruch was not written to be a sefer of Musar or hashkafa of life. It was written to give you concrete direction in specific situations. And I think in terms of overall orientation, the Rambam is not the only source, certainly, but the Rambam is certainly an enormously important makor for how you view things. And then, of course, this gets into the morass that Rav Aryeh Kaplan opened up. Is there a psak halacha in hashkafa? This is an issue that has many, many, many applications. Rav Aryeh Kaplan, Zichrono Livracha, wrote all the way back, back in the 1970s, that, and he had sources. I mean, anything he wrote, he had sources for. That in the realm of hashkafa, there is no psak halacha. Halacha at most can dictate your action, your thought. There are ikrei emunah, of course, but even the ikrei emunah, there are machloksim about nuances and the like. And he held there was no psak halacha in inyanim of hashkafa. On the other end, I have to say, he had a tremendous bar palukta against him, and that was none other than Rebbe Yashiv, who was not addressing Aryeh Kaplan per se. Rebbe Yashiv held there was. He says, whether somebody is an apikaris is a matter of halacha, just like whether the meat is kosher. So Memela, the hashkafa has to have. I mean, the problem basically is, because this is the old problem, because the problem is you will find in Rishonim and even in Chazal many, many opinions that based on the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim are apikorsis. So the issue is, can I hold like a Rishon, keneged the Rambam, and how can I be an apikaris if the Tana or the Amira or the other Rishon held such a view and wasn't an apikaris? So Rav Kaplan's answer to that would be, you're right, in matters of hashkafa, there's no psak halacha. Rav Yashiv would say, no, once the halacha is up to paskins, you're an apikaris now, but the guy who said it 100 years ago was not an apikaris. Some find that a very, very difficult thing to live with. But this is a big machlokas in Klal Yisrael. I don't want to get into controversy. Those of you who know Rev Nassan Slifkin, or Natan Slifkin as he goes by now, are aware that this was precisely the morass that he found himself in, whether there are definitive piskei halacha in hashkafa. But these are on controversial issues. I think in an issue like you're talking about, which is an issue of kivun, direction, kavana, there I think I'm much more comfortable, like any view, that you can follow the Rambam. You're not dealing with age of the earth. You're not dealing with nature of God. You're dealing with a different type of thing. Morally, what is my derech in life? And I will tell you this. I will tell you, I was not zeichen to know many, many, many gedolim, but I knew a few gedolim that I was close to. I was close to my own Rosh Hashiva, Rav Breitowotz, Zichrono Livracha. I had a little bit of acquaintance with Rav Moshe Feinstein and a little bit with Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. And I saw the way they interacted with Goyim. And it was always with respect. It was always with Kiddush Hashem. It was always in a way that acknowledged their Tselem Elokim. It wasn't just, I better be nice so the guy won't stab me with a knife or something. It was an inherent recognition of Tselem Elokim. They say, well, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, if there was a levaya, a funeral going by, a non-Jewish hearse, he would stop, he would walk 4 amos. Behind there, as he says, this is Tselem Elokim. We have to honor Tselem Elokim. And I will tell you something else which is maybe more pragmatic, and that is, once you inculcate this persona of people being less important, subhuman, it's going to poison your relationship to Jews as well. Now that's another pragmatic concern. As Mishum Eva, this is a drash, is not only that the guy will hate you, but Eva, you'll come to hate Jews. Because you start judging people, you start assigning people in categories. You start saying this person is better than this person is better than this person. It's going to affect you. It's going to affect the way you look at other Yidden. And Tanak V'Eliyahu says it, it's a medrash. Tanak V'Eliyahu says, he who steals from the guy will steal from the Jew. He who insults the guy will insult the Jew. So that's why Rav Yaakov used to say that, all of the pilpul that we go through in yeshiva, which is a big sugya, gezel akum, tois akum, genei v'stas, mutter aser, many heterim in these things. Rav Yaakov said, putting aside chilul Hashem, which is a biggie, that is a biggie, but putting that aside, he says you got to be very careful, because once you get in the habit of lying, cheating, taking advantage of people, it's going to spill over. You cannot confine your morality to certain people and not other people. So that's another perspective why I think the Rambam's approach, besides being maybe true, is also very helpful in building a better Jewish personality.
While operating a shul, how do we balance covered tzibur with the deraisa of not embarrassing someone? And I'll give two examples. Let's say someone comes up and says, "It was my bar mitzvah parsha 10 years ago, and I want to lame." And they're going to do a terrible job, and the regular Balkari will do a perfect job. So, do I say no, or does the person say no, we're embarrassed? And the second one is, let's say someone gets up to daven wearing shorts. So logically, that's not allowed. But it's not allowed at best of their abundance. Whereas embarrassing someone in front of the whole college, he gets up to daven and you say no, would be a deraisa.
Yeah.
So we'll always lose against a deraisa of embarrassing someone. So we're running a circus in the show basically. That we just allow anything because we're up against the deraisa of not embarrassing.
Yeah, this is really an excellent, good, and very difficult question. It really is. We have to remember, and all of you know this, I'm just repeating what you already know, how severe it is to embarrass somebody, and how it's an Isser D'Oraisa, and how Chazal say, better to throw yourself in a fiery furnace. Okay, it's a machlokes Rishonim if that's taken literally. Some Rishonim take it literally. Some Rishonim say, you gotta die before you do it. Other Rishonim say, it's lav dafka, but whatever it is, Chazal considered this to be chomer shebechamurais. And indeed, I will give teichacha to the fact, if a tzibur does not recognize that, there is something pagum in the tzibur. It's a real important thing. On the other hand, there is another hand. There's always another hand. A shul has to have standards. Tefillah is honoring the Melech. Tefillah is giving kavod to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You got to do so with the right decorum, the right respect, and the like. So you're right. You're always dealing with a balance. So you got to, so whether you're a Rav or whether you're a Gabbai or whether you're working in different ways, you got to figure out how to do this balance. And I think that part of what is very helpful, although it won't help you b'shas ma'isa, is you got to do advanced planning. You have to announce rules in advance, transparent rules in advance, so people know. People know that you're davening for the Amud. Now I know that in the yeshiva here, we have a black hat to give somebody. Maybe you have to have a pair of long pants to give somebody. I'm not sure. It's a little more difficult to pull off. But if these are rules that are announced ahead of time, I think you're going to avoid a lot of these problems. Or you can say nobody can lane in the shul unless the Thursday before Shabbos, either Baal Koreh or the Rav, sits with them. So you'll just know ahead of time. And as long as people know the rules, I think that takes away the embarrassment. What's really embarrassing is where somebody doesn't know, he has a yahrzeit, he goes to the Amud wearing shorts, in Eretz Yisrael, a lot of things are informal, and then all of a sudden, can't do it, you're not allowed to daven. No, that's embarrassing. Just like somebody sits in a makam, some shows, every seat is a makam kavua for somebody. A guy comes into a show, where is he supposed to sit? So if things are known in advance, I think that you can minimize a lot of these conflicts. B'diavad, if they're not known in advance, my natiyah would be to let things go, not to embarrass somebody. But you try to set things up where you're not going to have that conflict.
Thank you. Rabbi, in the famous story with the Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, where he told him, Reish Lakish, you were abandoned, you were this.
Yeah.
Reish Lakish got all insulted. Being that we're all Baal Shulas, I don't find the story so terrible. If a guy has a past and he can use his past to go through a sugya and help out the island, why was Reish Lakish so insulted, and why do we feel that I don't know if we do feel it, or we have something so bad.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, one
I guess
point,
my question,
yeah.
I guess the question is, what is ashkaka, especially in this yeshiva? What do we do? Do we remind people? Do we use their past to help us?
So, there's a famous Gemara in Maseches Yuma that says, when you do tshuva out of love, not just out of fear of God, but love of Hashem, so your averos become mitzvahs. Your averos become zechuyot. 1,000,000 averos are not just erased or become shogeggs, they become mitzvahs. And the obvious question is, I understand Hashem forgives you, I understand Hashem erases. Seder, that's forgiveness. But mitzvahs, I do 1,000,000 averos, they become mitzvahs. The Berditchever went over to the Russia of the town and said, I'm so jealous of you, all you need is 1 minute of tshuva me'ava, you're a lot better than me, because all of your averos, turn into mitzvahs. But I think the deep meaning of that mimer is very profound, and that is, tshuva does not only redirect your future. Tshuva redefines the significance of your past life. That your past life, which in many ways was not following Hashem, but you now draw on that past as the foundation of how you help people. A very simple example would be a person who was a drug addict, who now becomes a counselor to help people off addictions. He's not simply leaving his past, he's using his past in a positive way. Now I remember when Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the great Rosh Hashiva of Mir, Zichrono Livracha, was nifter. So, of course, he came from family. He was not a Baal Tshuva, but he came from a very miyuchas family. But he grew up, everyone knows the story, he grew up in a modern Orthodox concept. He went to a co-ed high school and everything else, and debating team, basketball team, girls, all of the treif stuff. So, at his levaya, the theme of the hespedim was all uniform. He says, look at what a person can become. He went to the worst type of environment, the worst schmutz, the worst garbage. And he was able to reject it and repudiate it. Now, I came from a roughly comparable background. I'm thinking about, I don't look at my childhood as so bad. I thought there were things I learned from it, things I gained from it. And I would suggest that although what the Maspidim are saying is emes, for sure, but there's another emes. Part of Rav Nosson Tzvi's greatness was not that he repudiated where he came from, but he constantly used it to give chizuk. You had modern American kids from high school, co-ed high schools coming to Amir, and they're meeting this Rosh Hashiva with a beard, they're all scared. And he starts talking about jump shots and all sorts of stuff. And he's showing them that, you can become a Talmid Chacham, you can shtad, you can grow. He was not trying to masquerade where he came from. He was using it in a positive way. And I think in many, many ways this applies to Bali Tshuva as well. Let's imagine if your paradigm of Tshuva is, I'm changing my life and I'm going to be a different person. Well, that's great, but that does mean that the first 20 years, the 25 years, or 30 years are like an empty waste. And then I think you have a kasha on Hashem. Why did God put me so behind the line here? There were 30 years I didn't have a chance. Not fair. But if you understand, if Hashem put you in North Dakota or Montana or a non-religious home, it's not that he was depriving you of something. He was giving you also a gift from which you will construct the uniqueness of your relationship. Yeah, different people are given different gifts, but you were given a gift too. And to simply turn your back on it and make believe it never existed is like amputating a limb. Now, sometimes you may have to amputate a limb. Sometimes something might be so toxic, you got to cut it off. But when you amputate a limb, you're never going to be whole. And therefore, real tshuva is not about amputation. Real tshuva is about transformation, reclaiming transformation. Now, in the yeshiva world, frankly, in all yeshivas, there's going to be a mixed message. Meaning, on one hand, you're telling God, gotta learn, you gotta reject a lot of the aspects of your past. But there also needs to be at least a sub-message in which at some point you got to go back. You got to reclaim. You got to recapture. You got to understand that even your past was the source of your kaichas, the source of your strength, the source of your uniqueness in in Avodas Hashem. That's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit difficult. But that's the only way you can even explain the meaning of your life. I mean, what would the point be of Hashem putting you in a non-religious environment for so many years? So you come back to Him, but those years are wasted, those years are garbage, those years are zero? Can't be. That wouldn't be just. That wouldn't even be fair. Elamai, there's something unique in that experience. So, the 5th generation or the 10th generation Yerushalmi has a million things that I don't have. It's true. But the guy that has something in South Dakota has something the 10th generation Yerushalmi doesn't have. Each of us are given matanos. You know, Rabbeinu Bechaya says in Zayis HaBracha, an amazing thing. He says, before a neshama is born, a neshama is shown everything it's going to experience in life, and it agrees that that is right. We agreed to all of this ahead of time. It made sense to us. So I agree with what you're saying. So your kasha is, if that's the case, why is Reish Lakish so upset? Fakert, Reish Lakish should have said, hey, yeah, that's right. I came with my background, and, that's what I became. So part of it, again, you have to look into part of it simply might be that at least in that particular moment, Rav Yochanan was cutting him down. Meaning I can look at a person's background and say, what a wonderful person you are, you came from that. Or I could say, you're really not as special as you think. So Reish Lakish intuited at that moment that Rav Yochanan meant to shtuch him a little bit. So when it's done in the right way, however, it's very life-affirming. It actually is very, very positive. It gives a person a sense of mission, a sense of purpose. That's why I am not in favor of people, and not just me, I think this is the whole mahalach of Or Sameach. I think the whole yeshiva is this way, that we do not discourage like cutting off relations with family or with parents or the like, because ultimately it's healthy for a person to draw from those experiences. I tell the story a lot. I knew a fellow, he lives in Mea Shearim actually, he's Mamash Hasidic Yid, but he grew up in a totally assimilated family in Virginia. And he became a chassid. Not just a Baal Tshuva, he became a chassid with Nisaks and everything else. And he married a woman who went through the same process. Maybe the only two people in the world, who did this. They came together. So I was invited to the chasna in Mea Shearim, and I felt a little funny. It wasn't my usual environment, although I had a black hat, dark suit. But his parents, who came from Virginia, they hadn't seen their son in 3 years. To them, it was the Twilight Zone. I still remember in my mind's eye, the father's mouth was agape. He was just staring around at what was going on. It made no sense to him at all. In fact, not only was there were more than a mechitza, the women were like a block away. The women, it's like two different halls, but they come together for Sheva Brachas. And the chassan gave a little speech in Yiddish, which was pretty amazing. Then he turned to his parents and he said, Mom and Dad, I want you to know that although I'm living a life very different than what you imagined, I want you to know that 90% of what I am is from you, and the 10% that's different is because you gave me the courage to follow where I felt I needed to go. So everything I have, I'm grateful to you. Now, to me, this was extraordinarily moving. I remember I was sitting next to a Hasidic guy who kept on nodding away. I didn't even know if the guy knew English. Maybe he was an American. Who knows? You never know in America. But this was mamash a moment of Devarim Hayotzim in Alev, Nichnasim al Alev. And to me, this is the ideal relationship. Your tshuva comes from the totality of your life. And you got to reclaim those experiences. What did you learn from them? Otherwise, it's just a waste. Otherwise, it's a tragedy. If you learn something from it, then it becomes part of your growth. So excuse me for being marich, but it really is such an important nekuda in life that it's something we should think about.
Agree?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes. Do you think that the massacre that happened on October 7th, we put so much emphasis on it nowadays, do you think that kind of detracts from previous tragedies that happened before that were much more grand and spectacle and scale?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Listen, this was a tragedy, and of course we have to respond to it. But when people use the Lashon right afterwards, this is the worst day since the Holocaust, although maybe, most literal sense that may happens to be true, but to compare it to the Holocaust, I think is 6 million to 1,200. Okay, I understand. Every neshama is an olam maleh, but you're correct. We have been through much, much worse. Frankly, we are a weaker generation. It is very, very true that things affect us in ways that the Friedrich Adairis would have taken more in stride, whether it's crusades, even before the Holocaust. I mean, how many people were killed in a crusade of wiping out, massacring towns, thousands and thousands of people. We are weaker. I would also say, too, again, it's a little controversial a little bit, that part of why Israeli society is reacting so much to this is not only the real tragedy of both deaths and hostages, and of course we have to be margish that tragedy for sure, but part of it was the disillusionment with the feeling that we've created the perfect Zionist system, meaning we had the best military, we have the best military intelligence, we have fail-safe systems to detect any type of penetration through the fences. And all of those systems failed. To this day, it's almost a nace, in a negative sense, of how this could have happened. It makes no sense. How could it happen? How could it be that for 5 or 6 hours, these terrorists can just enter the state of Israel and just have, carte blanche to inflict the havoc that they inflicted? It's unbelievable. So I think part of what is scaring people, and Baruch Hashem, I think maybe a Maimon is less scared about this, is, hey, all of the stuff that we thought created our safety, all of that stuff is not true anymore. So it's not just the particular people who died and the hostages, it's kind of the undermining of the security. Now for a Maimon, we can basically say, yeah, that's what we've learned. We've learned that everything is totally on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there are no systems that we create that are fail-safe. Ein lanu l'hishayin ela al Avinu shebashamayim. So I do agree with you that in many, many ways, the societal reaction seems to be more extreme than it has been in the past. But I think that's primarily not because of greater compassion. Unfortunately, I don't think we've grown in compassion, but either because of greater weakness or the disillusionment with the secular mechanisms that we thought were so strong and so powerful. But again, I hasten to say this because I don't mean at all to demean the need for our tefillas and the pain that we should feel for those who are suffering. That obviously is very, 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 very important. That should be at the forefront of our thoughts. In fact, a mother wrote me just yesterday, and I think she had a good point. She has, it's a difficult problem. She has what might be called yeshiva mother guilt, meaning she has her children who are learning well in the yeshiva cult. Some are married, some are not. But she kind of feels guilty that they're not fighting, etc. And, my sons are going on a Ben Azmanim vacation, and, the people in Gaza, it's that type of thing, which is an interesting psychological dynamic. So she said she wanted her children to at least feel the pain of what people are going through. So she asked her son, when you learn every morning, can you just start your learning by saying, may this be a zechus for the Chatufim and the people who are fighting in Gaza or the north, whatever it would be. And she said her son said this was not necessary. Now, there I think there is a makom for tikkun. I think the mother actually has a very, very excellent point. I think it's a very good point. Yes, Torah learning is the most important thing that brings Hashem's rachamim into the world. But when I learn Torah, I should feel that I'm a chelek of Am Yisrael that is going through this struggle. It shouldn't just be, this has nothing to do with me. The Rambam says, even when tragedies happen among Goyim, if there's a tsunami, if there's a hurricane, if there's an earthquake in the Philippines or wherever in China, if a person is not margish the suffering of the people, he's an achzari. That's a non-Jewish world. How can you not cry over 10,000 people getting killed somewhere in the whatever it is? So kal v'chomer ben benoshel kal v'chomer, if it's achenu b'nei Yisrael. So I do think that there is an important idea of identifying with the Tsar. But again, going back to your direct question, I would just say that I think people are making this into such a big thing, primarily because of the failure of the mechanisms of the state.
Robert, and then Ari.
Just to return to the old halacha for a moment, the Rav spoke yesterday in Shir and mentioned that if someone's makabel Shabbos early, they are free to ask somebody who's not yet in makabel Shabbos to do any type of malacha for them. It's all well, there's nothing wrong with that. Yet it seems the halacha is the exact opposite when it comes to Ben Chutzlaritz, who's in Eretz Yisrael for Yantiv and celebrating second day Yantiv. They're not allowed to ask Ben Eretz Yisrael to do malacha for them on second day Yantiv. And it seems to me the two examples are exactly lined up, very comparable, and somehow the halacha is exactly opposite. Maybe Rav can explain why that is.
Yep. This is a perennial problem. We have it here in Yeshiva all the time, where a lot of our Talmidim, maybe most of our Talmidim, intend to go back to Chutz La'aretz. So if they're Ashkenazim, at least, Sephardim actually will keep one day, but if they're Ashkenazim, they'll keep Yom Tov Sheni. Those who live in Eretz Yisrael, of course, do not keep Yom Tov Sheni. So the question is, if I keep Yom Tov Sheni, can I ask the Israeli to do malacha for me? So I just want to add something. The Chidah L'maisa says it is mutter, meaning it is actually a machlokas. It's not so pashut that it's aser. The Chidah actually says that it is mutter, and if that's the case, that's no stira to the Ramah by Tosefes Shabbos. But on the other hand, you are correct. There are shittas that do say it is aser. So your question is a very excellent question.
How do we paskin?
It's a machlokas how we paskin, meaning b'makam. So it really depends. Where it's a great need, we're actually makel, or if you can do it biremiza, it's better to do it that way. You try to do it biremiza, but l'maisa, there are a lot of cases we are makel for various reasons. So the question becomes, remember the Ramah that I mentioned, that you mentioned, says if I was makabel Shabbos early, I'm allowed to ask a Jew without remiza. I'm allowed to ask a Jew who is not makabel Shabbos, do malacha for me. Rav Moshe has one exception. You can't ask your wife. Well, we'll talk about that another year. Maybe Rav Asher will talk about it. But outside of your wife, you can ask your neighbor to do malacha for you. So the interesting question is, Shabbos for me, not for you. I'm allowed to ask you to do malacha. Yom Tov for me and not for you. Many poskim say I'm not allowed to ask. Is it not the same thing? It's a very good question, and the Achrayim raise it as a question. But it seems conceptually that there's a difference between a holy zman that you're obligated to keep and a holy zman that you volitionally accept upon yourself. Being makabel Shabbos early was my decision, even though once I accept it, I'm bound, but it was not a chi of the halacha put upon me, and therefore it does not have a kedushas Shabbos to the extent that you can't ask a person who didn't accept. Masha enkein the chiyuv of Yom Tov Sheni is a chiyuv on me because I come from Chutz La'aretz. If it's daitai lachsor to Chutz La'aretz, the halacha is mechayev me to keep the Yom Tov, and therefore the halacha will prohibit me, according to some opinions at least, from asking. So I think the chiluk is volitional versus mandatory. If it's a mandatory kedusha, you're not given that head. Say again?
Volitional to the extent that chosen to live.
Well, okay. Well, ultimately, yeah. But in terms of given your living situation, you are now mechuyev. If you're now mechuyev, so this strictness may apply to you. There.
For a person that's davening in a minyan or shul that's not there, nusa, so like if I'm davening in a Sephardi minyan or whatever. So some take the position that there's basically no lotus kosher today because we're all mixed up anyways, and therefore I can do all my Ashkenazim minhagim, stand up for Kaddish and all these things, but like I've been in these minyanim and some people don't. Some people follow exactly the native tzibor, the Sephardi, and they'll sit down for the Kaddish and all that, so I'm not sure what I should do or
Well, again, I always tell people when you're taking a halacha bechina and it's multiple choice, and one says A, B, or machlokas, you just put machlokas, you'll always be right. And that's why you have to say, if you're a teacher, please explain your answer. That's the thing. But you're right, it is a machlokas. But derech klal, I think the hachra is, Rav Moshe says, on that at least until the Amida, meaning after Shemon, what you do after Shemon Esrei already, the minyan is kind of winding down. But until the Amida, you try to follow the minhagim, at least in a way that you're not violating them publicly. So your private nusach, Rav Moshe said, you daven your private nusach, except when you answer kedusha and kaddish and the like. But in terms of standing and sitting, you should follow the minhagim of the tzibur. But I would say this: L'maisa, it's very rare that you'd have to do this, because when it comes to standing, sitting, all of these things, everybody's holding in a different part of the sitter. So I see you standing. I'm not going to think, oh, you're standing up for kaddish, or you're sitting for kaddish. You're in different parts of the davening. So b'derech klal, I don't think you have to worry about leisus gayyudah, simply because it's not nicker at all that you're really deviating.
What about nefilas of time? It's right after Shemona Esrei, and as far as at least the show I've been going to, they don't do it. So I'm like the only guy.
You're talking about for mincha, they don't do it?
Yeah.
Yeah, for mincha, yeah. Many Hasidic places don't do it. It's always, or vidoy, right. Yeah. So, again, many say after Chazaras Hashatz there's no leisus guy to do. But it is brought down that l'chol ha'pachos, the Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim, you should say, not out leisus guy to do. You should say, because Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim are always a good thing to say. But you wouldn't have to say the vidoy. So it seems the real hachra is that bisman hazeh, because everything is ma'uriv and everything is samished together, that we don't really have such a hakpad on leisus gadu in these minyanim.
And therefore, it's better to do your own minhagim. Like sometimes I'm like embarrassed. I'm doing nefilas of time.
It would be better to do your own minhagim. Yeah, if there's no leisus gadu, so you do your own minhagim.
You were saying vidu and Ashkenaz minyan, but Father Moshe would say you shouldn't clap.
Don't clap, right? So don't do it in a conspicuous way. But you can say vide, nobody knows what you're doing. It's like davening in Nusach Sfarad generally in an Ashkenaz minyan, which is going to be okay.
The mayor, and then I was thinking maybe I have the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask the Rav anyway. Is there a way to assess how much of one's time to give to kiruv? I, for example, have semi-retired in order to make up time that I gave up for professional school when I was 20 to 25, and I want to learn. Is there a way for me to assess how much of that time really belongs to doing kiruv?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. How much time do you do the kiruv? So, many of you might know this. You remember a famous tshuva of Rav Moshe all the way back in the early 60s, in which he called upon B'nai Torah, and he said that the chiyuv of meiser, got to give 10%, is not only a chiyuv of money, but it's also a chiyuv of zman. Now, and he was talking about full-time Kallah people, they should give at least 10% of their earnings, and maybe up to a chaimish, not their earnings, their time, towards inyanim of kiruv, rechaikim, and the like. And even though he was referring to B'nai Torah, that might be at least a useful starting point for you. Meaning you try to designate time for your own learning, but you designate a proportion of time where you're Isaac and kiruv rechaikim. Now, you may then find that your hatzlacha is such that you may be drawn to it more and more. But I would add here, too, I just want to add as an aside, it's extremely important for anyone that's Isaac and kiruv rechaikim to have a zman that is set aside for their own learning. It's very, very important. And sometimes this is a bit of a yetzer hara, because after all, when you're teaching Baalei Tshuva, although you're teaching very intelligent, capable people, but they know less than you. And if they know less than you, so I'm teaching them Gemara or something, I don't necessarily have to learn this Taisvis or this Ramban, because they're not going to get there. Or although maybe they will, and then you'll be in big trouble. But I assume they're not going to get there, right? But there's a very big mistake, because if you're not growing in your own learning, you get burnt out, you get emptied. And as the saying goes in Yeridea, Aidi the treaty lamiflat. When you're always giving out, lo bali, you're not absorbing anymore. So when you're not replenishing your stock, not only are you hurting yourself, but you're hurting your ability to be makarev people and to be an effective teacher. So I'm not going to tell you, b'davka, do 100% kiruv rechaikim. B'davka, you need to have a lot of learning. And even if the learning is not connected to the kiruv, I don't necessarily mean learning the things that I'm teaching, although that can help too. Even learning something that has no shaykhs to what you're teaching. It'll keep you connected to Torah. When you're connected to Torah, you'll get inspiration and ideas and understandings from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that will help you to be mashpia on people and the like. In fact, it may be important for Dafka to learn something that's not connected to your outreach activity, because it's just for you, and it builds you up. When it builds you up, you're then able to give. So I would say, again, between 10 and 20% should be your starting point, and then see where it takes you.
I have a question. People Yarchei Kallah we've given for a time to come learn all Machshav Torah. It's such a central focus of everything. Why is it in the Tanakh that it's all Burmese? In the Chukais that Telechu Shtiu Amelim Torah, he used to again B'Lailas to Yeshua. You don't find the Nevi'im yelling, "Rabbi Yisai Bittul Torah," like we have in Yeshiva.
Yeah.
It's Ikras Chosser.
It's a very excellent question. I mean, this is a question that the Judaism of Tanakh. I just read Tanakh. Tanakh does not match up totally with the Judaism of Chazal. Right? I read Tanakh. Tanakh are stories of wars, of military heroism, of different things that are sometimes very difficult to understand, even the way people behaved. And yes, the Nevi'im give Teichacha and Averos. When we do Avodah Zarah, Gili Araya, Shvichus Domim, eating treif, Chilul Shabbos, these things are talked about by the Nevi'im, and there'll be bad consequences. But you don't find, such direct Teichacha and Bittul Torah. Again, there are drushas Chazal give us, Al Ozva Mes Teirasi, Lo Bircha B'Torah Techila. But again, in Pashut Pshat, Al Ozva Mes Teirasi is not referring to learning Torah. It means they're not keeping the mitzvah. I mean, the simple translation, they're not keeping the mitzvahs. So there is what you call, what they call cognitive dissonance, meaning to say we have a certain view of what Yiddishkeit is, and I then read the Tanakh, and it seems to be a different type of world, a different type of orientation, a different type of priority. This is actually one of the reasons why Nach was discouraged in learning in yeshivas, precisely because I'm learning Nefesh HaChaim, and then I read Sefer Malachim, and Nefesh HaChaim and Sefer Malachim don't externally seem to match as closely as I would want them to match, right? That's exactly part of the problem. The short answer is I don't know. Meaning I'll admit I don't know. Meaning like this: we understand that Torah Shebechsav can only be understood in Torah Shebal Peh, and through the prism of Torah Shebal Peh, we see all of these inyanim. Torah Shebal Peh will bring in the importance of Talmud Torah, the destruction of what happens when you're not learning. So in the prism of Torah Shebal Peh, all of these Yesaitis are brought in, but your question is still a very good question. Okay, it's through the prism of Torah Shebal Peh. Why wasn't it important enough for it to be within the text itself? So all I can answer, I don't have an answer. It's a good question. I can just answer your question with another question, time-honored Jewish minhag, and that is, we bichlal don't understand how things are divvied up between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. Right? What was Hashem's decision-making process, so to speak? Why did the Eibishter leave certain things in the written text and certain things outside of the text? The truth is, I don't think any of us really knows that. But there is a demarcation, and if we believe they both come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then we have to be maimin that the pshat of the psukim is al pi the Torah Shebal Peh. But it's again a very excellent question. Yeah, just
okay. I think we have to stop here. Max, you get a chance here.
Okay. Anyway, I just want to say thank you very, very much, and it was a big cover to be with you, and thank you. Okay.